As many of you know, I'm a powerlifter and a bodybuilder. In today's workout, I'm going to start out with a main lift, squat, and then I'm going to progress to some accessory work for arms and calves. I'm going to use blood flow restriction training in order to target those areas. I like to use blood flow restriction because it enables me to get a lot of volume and muscle stimulation in without taxing my joints too much or detracting from my main lifts. So now we're going to get started with this workout, starting out with squats. So today I'll be doing 4 sets of 6 reps, and I'll be taking about anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes of rest between each set. Now I'm not going to talk about how I actually perform squats today. If you want to know more about how I recommend performing squats for you and your body type specifically, check out the How to Squat video tutorial I provided on the page below. I kind of go through the same sort of progression when I squat because I have the same mentality. I get my music on, then I put my belt on. I make sure everything's in position where I want it.
Do what it is you're supposed to do. What is your profession?
And then when I get to the bar, I'm going through my checklist. Breathe, brace.
Don't stop.
Take the bar out. 3-step walkout. Get in position. Breathe and brace. Push your hips back. Push your knees out. All those things I go through, and it just leads to a more repeatable outcome. Don't just get in there and start going. Think about what you're actually going to do. Think about how you're going to do it. What do you want to accomplish with that workout? Woo. Deceiving, isn't it? I'm such a slow squatter. I'll do 1 and people are like, oh, he maybe have 1 more left. Do 6 more. A lot of people will think that, oh, you squat 600 plus pounds, 400, 500, it's easy. It's not easy, it still feels heavy. The difference is my focus. Many people believe that taking longer rests cuts down on muscle stimulation, but that's not necessarily the case. Time under tension is cumulative. So even though I'm taking long rests, my time under tension for all the sets combined is still going to be similar. And by taking longer rests, I enable myself to use more weight and do it more safely. There's definitely benefits to shorter rest periods. However, if you're going to do that, I prefer doing that when you're using lighter weight or not using compound exercises. This is how you should be breathing if you're breathing correctly. It's how you breathe afterwards. When I go train a different gym, sometimes it can be a little bit harder because I'm out of my element. It's a little bit different. But it's good training too because on meet day, you're going to be at a different place.
Ah! What is your profession?
And I train with a lot of people, so I'm used to having a lot of people watch me when I lift. So when I go to a meet, it doesn't affect me. It's not over. It's not over till you win. 1 more round. It's not always about killing it when you feel good. Some days it's about grinding when you feel terrible.
1 more round. Action. With some drive.
Woo! Round 1 down, blood flow restriction coming up next. So why would we want to do blood flow restriction? Is it better than regular training? Is it worse than regular training? The research suggests that blood flow restriction is basically as good as normal heavy training. So people say, well, why would you do it? Well, the reason you'd want to do blood flow restriction is you can use much less weight. You can use really light weights and still get the same hypertrophy effects as you can with heavy weights. So obviously for somebody like me who's doing heavy squats, heavy bench, heavy deadlifts, and is pretty destroyed by the time they get through their main lifts, doing something like blood flow restriction where I don't have to load up my joints again with as much weight is very beneficial. For blood flow restriction, you're going to wrap proximal to your limb. So any upper body work, you're always gonna wrap the top of the arm. For any lower body work, you're always gonna wrap the top of the thigh, regardless of what you're working. For upper body work, I prefer a smaller cuff, like a quick release medical tourniquet. There's some scientific evidence that the area that the cuff covers does not get the benefits from BFR, so you want as minimal a cuff as you can get for a smaller limb. For lower body, which is a bigger limb, you can have a wider cuff, like a knee wrap, which is what I'll be using for calves. A lot of people will ask, well, how tight should I wrap? It depends on the cuff you're using and it depends on how wide the cuff is. But in general, if I'm using knee wraps for a lower limb, I'll wrap about a 7 out of 10. For arms, when I'm using quick release medical tourniquets, because they're so thin, I'm pulling them to about a 9 out of 10. So for bicep curls, we're gonna start with about 20% of my 1 rep max, which will be about 15 pounds. We'll do 2 clusters of 4 sets each cluster. The cuffs stay on for the entire cluster of 4 sets. After it's done, I'll take it off, rest, and then put it back on before the second cluster. The 4 sets of each cluster will go like this. 30 reps on the first set, 15 reps for each set afterwards. I'll rest 30 seconds between each set. One thing to point out is you should have some discomfort while you're lifting. You'll have a really painful pump. But if you're in pain before you start the exercise, it's likely that the wraps are too tight. And I would recommend taking them off and rewrapping. Another way to know if the wraps are too tight or the weight is too heavy is if you can't complete the repetitions. If you're using a legitimate 20% of your 1 rep max and you can't complete the sets of 30, 15, 15, 15, the wraps are too tight. Or you're overestimating your 1 rep max. So that was cluster number 1 we just finished. I'm gonna take a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes, let my blood flow normalize, and then I'll go back in for cluster number 2. One of the things you're gonna notice with blood flow restriction, if you're doing it right, by the end, it's gonna be a ridiculous pump. People will hear me say that and think I'm speaking in hyperbole, but I'm not. If you've ever done BFR, you know this. It's definitely very challenging from just a pain tolerance aspect because the pump becomes very painful. There should be some tightness, some discomfort, you'll feel a fluid shift, but make sure you're not in pain before the exercise. But the likelihood that you will be in pain during the exercise is pretty high. I like to take my time, make sure I've got them in the right spot, make sure they're about both equal tightness. Don't go into blood flow restriction trying to use as heavy of a load as you can. Make sure it's light, make sure you can complete the reps and get the volume in. If you can go heavier and keep good form and keep good cadence, then that's fine. But make sure you're not overdoing it in terms of weight or how tight the wraps are. Let's talk about mechanisms. How does it actually work? I don't want to say anything has actually been shown to be the mechanism, but one of the proposed mechanisms is cellular swelling. When you do blood flow restriction training, you will feel a fluid shift when you put the cuffs on. And they've actually shown that you can get about 20% cellular swelling from blood flow restriction training. And that cellular swelling may be driving increases in muscle protein synthesis. There's some data to indicate that a hydrated cell, a swelled cell, is an anabolic cell. So we just finished up BFR for biceps. Now we're moving on to triceps. It's gonna be the same wraps, the same reps, the same sets, and the same rest. The only difference, we're doing cable tricep press downs. Another possible mechanism is targeting of type 2 fibers. I like to try and get my shirt under the wrap, otherwise it gets a little bit abrasive on your arm, but it doesn't have to be under the wrap. Typically your fibers are recruited in order. So your body will recruit your slow twitch, smaller fibers first, and as a weight gets heavier and heavier, as you approach failure, it will start recruiting intermediate fibers, and then finally it will recruit fast twitch heavy fibers. What blood flow restriction does by restricting that blood flow, it seems to pre-exhaust the type 1 slow twitch fibers, and you go right into stimulating the type 2 fibers. So you get a preferential stimulation of those type 2 fast twitch, big potential growth fibers. Another possible mechanism for blood flow restriction is metabolic byproduct accumulation. There's actually some research to suggest that things like lactate, hydrogen ion accumulation, they actually may drive anabolic signaling. Well, when you're restricting blood flow, normally a lot of those metabolites would, for lack of a better term, be washed out of the muscle. But by restricting blood flow, the venous return, they're staying in that area. That's one round down. Gonna rest a minute or two, and go back for the second round. What seems to make a big difference is the intrinsic growth factors within the muscle. So your muscle actually releases its own IGF-1 in response to training. That can interact with receptors on the muscle to possibly drive growth. All right, time for round two. Well, when you are doing BFR, again, by holding those metabolites in that area, perhaps you're giving those anabolic hormones that your muscle releases a greater opportunity to interact with those receptors and create more growth. One thing I do is I'm always trying to check my time it takes me to complete a set, because if it takes me much less time during one set, it means I was probably rushing. So I always like to make sure my sets are pretty consistent time-wise. I want to emphasize that blood flow restriction is not better than heavy training, but it seems to get about the same results. Which again, this has merit for not only for powerlifters who want to do some hypertrophy work like myself, but if you have an injury where you can't lift heavy, it's an excellent tool. And that is a wrap for arms. Now we're going to move on to calves. One of the things you need to keep in mind with blood flow restriction for your limbs is you're going to wrap at the same spot regardless of whether you're doing blood flow restriction for calves, quads, or hamstrings. You're going to wrap proximal to the limb. So as high on your leg as you possibly can. I like to use knee wraps. They're cheap and easy to use. Another group of people that it could be beneficial for is people who travel a lot. So a lot of times we have somebody who travels, they can't make it to a regular gym, they just have a hotel room gym that only goes up to 20-pound dumbbells. So it creates a lot more opportunities for you to get more sessions and create more growth. It also seems to cause a little bit less muscle damage than regular training, which again, you can recover a little bit faster from it and do more sessions possibly to create more growth. It's fun. You actually feel your heart rate go up because even in a short limb like a calf, your body is working harder to try and get that venous return to the heart. So your heart rate actually increases just from blood flow restriction. So one more round of BFR, and that's a wrap, pun intended. And my calves feel about 5 times the normal size. That's it. So if you have any questions about anything we've covered here, you can find me on BodySpace, on the Bodybuilding.com forums, or you can find me on Twitter @BioLayne. For more videos, articles, and other great content from myself and other great contributors, keep coming back to Bodybuilding.com.